Sergio Perez has just come out and dropped an absolute bombshell, with the Mexican explaining key details about his time at Red Bull, not only exposing the team as a whole, but also specific personnel such as former team principal Christian Horner and his ex-teammate Max Verstappen. For years in Formula One, there's been an uncomfortable pattern at Red Bull Racing that fans, pundits, and even former drivers have quietly danced around. Every driver who partners Max Verstappen eventually struggles, not just a dip in form, a collapse. Since 2019, we've seen it with Pierre Gasly, Alex Albon, Sergio Perez, Liam Lawson, and Yuki Tsunoda. Different drivers, different backgrounds, same outcome. And for a long time, the default excuse was simple. Max is just that good. But what Perez has done now, finally free from Red Bull, finally off the payroll, is explain how this environment actually works from the inside. And once you hear it in his own words, it becomes very hard to ignore. In a recent interview, Perez has said, "I knew what I was getting into at Red Bull. During my first discussion with Christian Horner, he told me, we're going to race with two cars because we have to have two cars. But this project was created for Max. He's our talent. I was in the best team, a very complicated team. Being Max's teammate is already very difficult, but being Max's teammate at Red Bull is the worst job in Formula One. That line, being Max's teammate at Red Bull is the worst job there is in F1. That's not a throwaway line. That's a six-time race winner, a veteran of the sport, telling you that the second seat at Red Bull is structurally broken. Now, as for the quote, we're going to race with two cars because we have to have two cars. But this project was created for Max. He's our talent. That wasn't said later. That wasn't implied through actions. That was said up front. In other words, we'll run two cars because the regulations demand it. But don't get it twisted about who this team belongs to. And funnily enough, this is something that had been speculated for years by some within the F1 community, only for those people to be accused of being crazy conspiracy theorists. From day one, Perez wasn't walking into an equal partnership. He was walking into Max Verstappen's team, a contractual agreement that he is only to be a prop for Verstappen and never to challenge him. That single quote alone reframes everything that follows. Now let's talk about performance, because this is where Perez's comments become genuinely uncomfortable for Red Bull. Perez went on to explain that whenever the car was stable, predictable, planted, confidence-inspiring, he could perform at a very high level, and when that happened, the internal atmosphere shifted immediately. In his own words, everything was a problem. If I was very fast, there was a problem. The environment became very tense if I was faster than Max. If I was slower than Max, it was a problem. So, everything was a problem. That isn't a normal racing team dynamic. That's a system where the second driver cannot win, cannot lose, and cannot exist without pressure. Perez then gives a very specific example, and this is where it stops being abstract and becomes concrete. He talked about Baku. According to Perez, in Baku, the team modifies the floor, they put it on me, and I'm a second faster than everyone else. It was going very well. I was going to win that race. A second faster, not a tenth. A second. And then everything collapses. Perez collides with Carlos Sainz, destroys the car, and never sees that upgrade again. He explains, I didn't touch that floor again because there were few races left and everything was for Max. From there, I was already like 5 races back in updates. 5 races behind. In Formula One, in a title-contending car. That's not coincidence, that's prioritization. And also, doesn't this sound awfully familiar to what happened with Yuki Tsunoda? Because he too, back in 2025, spoke about how after his crash at Imola, where he crashed in qualifying, that for the remainder of the season that he was consistently running with a B-spec car that didn't have the upgrades that Verstappen was running. It makes you think as to how fair Red Bull treats their two drivers. Moving on, Perez even acknowledged the what if, but in a very telling way. He said, what would have happened if I had that car for the rest of the season? Who knows? And I think things happen for a reason. Now, although to some this might be considered a futile hypothetical statement from Checo, in reality it's not, because these butterfly effect moments could have altered the timeline of F1 significantly. Had he received the floor that he was performing well on, that could have been the difference between him being replaced at the end of 2024 by Lawson, which would have also affected Lawson being dropped after only 2 races by Tsunoda, only for Tsunoda to be dropped by Red Bull at the end of 2025. As we know, Perez is making a return to the grid with Cadillac, but the point still stands that Red Bull, if these rumours are true, are essentially screwing over their drivers' F1 careers with these alleged antics. Perez then also went on to elaborate on how the team was shaped around Verstappen, which hindered his own performances. He said, at the start of the 2022 season, the car was accidentally too heavy. We then had a very heavy car with a weight distribution very far forward, which made it much more stable. That's what I always looked for. I remember that at that moment in the simulator I was faster than Max, Perez looks back. I went into the weekend with the idea of winning the race and everything went by itself. As a driver, you didn't have to think about how to control the car because everything went by itself. Everything went well. When we had that car, perhaps not entirely in Max's style, I started to fight the championship with him. Until the upgrades came. Once the upgrades were there, the team started clearly heading in one direction. I no longer know what the car will do in the corner. I think about not crashing and then the collisions begin. You don't have 100% control. In 2023, Red Bull again came with a slightly more stable car. Max wins one race, I the other. After 4 races, he had won 2 and I 2, so we were very evenly matched. If this doesn't tell you what exactly was happening behind the scenes, then I don't know what will. Now, this is important because Perez is not trying to tear Verstappen down. In fact, he's very clear about Verstappen's strengths. He said, Max is a super strong driver mentally. He has an impressive talent, he is very focused, he is a very big force for the team, and he is a great leader. But then Perez adds something you almost never hear said publicly. The bad thing, I think, is his character. When things turn against him, he finds it hard to deal with it. Like what happened in Barcelona. He freezes up. He has that side, but I also think he wouldn't be Max if he didn't. That last line matters, because Perez isn't saying Verstappen is weak, he's saying Red Bull protects that side of Verstappen by eliminating internal threats. Which brings us back to the bigger picture. When you line this up with Gasly, Albon, Lawson and Tsunoda, the pattern becomes obvious. Red Bull is not designed to manage 2 competitive drivers. It is designed to orbit 1, the car development, the upgrade timing, the internal pressure, the narrative control. And Sergio Perez has now confirmed, in detail, in quotes and without bitterness, that this is how it works. So when people ask why Red Bull teammates suddenly forget how to drive, they don't. They're driving in a system where everything they do becomes a problem. And Sergio Perez has finally said it out loud. And to end the video on one absolute bombshell quote from Perez, just listen to the interaction that he had with Horner after finding out that Lawson was set to replace him. Perez said, "At that moment I said to him, 'Christian, what are you going to do when it doesn't work out with Liam?' He replied that was Yuki. 'And what are you going to do when it doesn't work out with Yuki?' He replied, 'We have a lot of drivers.' I told him he was going to use them all and he said, 'Yes, I know.'"